There's a study most doctors haven't read. It followed over 146,000 adults, all of them 65 or older, and it compared their health outcomes across different types of physical activity: running, cycling, swimming, yoga, walking, and one other thing that almost nobody expected to be on the list: gardening. Not only was it on the list, it outperformed most of the others. People who gardened regularly had a meaningfully lower risk of developing diabetes than those who did other forms of exercise. But here's the part that stopped us cold when we read it. You don't even have to eat the vegetables. The digging, the planting, the harvesting. It's already doing something to your body before a single vegetable reaches your plate. Which means everything I am about to tell you is a second gift on top of something you may already be doing. Today we're going through 10 specific vegetables, each one chosen for what research says about the body after 50. Not the body in general, yours specifically. One of them has produced blood pressure reductions that researchers compared directly to prescription medication, not loosely. In clinical language. We'll get to that, and you'll want to remember the number. One was linked to a brain that measured 11 years younger. We'll tell you exactly how many servings it took. And one, the last one, is ready to harvest in less time than it takes a library book to come due. One of these vegetables is probably growing in a garden near you right now, and almost nobody realizes what it can do for an aging body. And another may completely change the way you think about what a garden is actually for. But first, the vegetable that does something almost no health intervention does for older bodies. It doesn't just help, it helps more. Vegetable 1. Beetroot. We said one vegetable on this list gets more effective as you age. This is the one. Beetroot. Almost every conversation about aging centers on what works less: slower metabolism, reduced bone density, longer recovery. Beetroot is one of the few interventions in the scientific literature where older adults showed a bigger response than younger ones. Not the same, measurably larger. Beetroot is dense in dietary nitrate. Your body converts it into a compound that relaxes and widens blood vessels, reducing the pressure your heart has to push against. Researchers call it vasodilation. You'll feel it as blood pressure that behaves better. Imagine two neighbors in their late 60s, taking the same morning walk they've taken for years. Same street. Same distance. One begins adding beetroot regularly to meals. Months later, their blood pressure readings start drifting in different directions. That's the kind of difference gardeners became interested in understanding. Across studies, beetroot lowered systolic blood pressure, the top number, by an average of around 4.5 points. In trials that compared age groups directly, adults between 50 and 70 showed a greater response than adults aged 18 to 30. One note: if you're already on blood pressure medication, adding a food with measurable BP lowering effects is worth mentioning to your doctor. Not to stop anything, just so they have the full picture. A vegetable that earns more trust from your body the older you are. That's genuinely rare. Now, most people believe cooking destroys nutrients. For the next vegetable, that belief is exactly backwards. And the misunderstanding may have been protecting your heart for years without you knowing it. Vegetable 2. Dwarf tomatoes. There's a vegetable most of us cook regularly, and cooking it, it turns out, is the right thing to do. Not despite the heat, because of it. Tomatoes. For most vegetables, heat reduces nutritional availability. Tomatoes are one of the meaningful exceptions. Cooking breaks down the cell walls and dramatically increases how much of the active compound your body can absorb. Tomatoes are one of the richest sources of lycopene, a carotenoid linked to cardiovascular protection. In its raw form, lycopene is partially locked inside the cell structure. Heat freeze it, which means your pasta sauce, your roasted tomatoes, your slow-cooked shakshuka, all of it is doing more than you thought. A review of 25 studies found that high tomato and lycopene intake was associated with a 26% lower risk of stroke and a 37% lower risk of cardiovascular death. Heart disease remains the leading cause of death for adults over 60. That makes this one of the most practically important vegetables on the entire list, and one you may already have growing. The benefit appears strongest with regular, consistent intake, not occasional tomato eating. This is a case where the garden earns its keep across the full season, not just one harvest. Every time you've cooked tomatoes down and thought you were cooking out the goodness, you were actually unlocking it. Tomatoes for your heart. Now for the one that speaks to the fear most of us carry quietly and almost never say out loud. Vegetable 3. Romaine lettuce. Before we get to the vegetable, there's something worth naming first. Something most health content doesn't say plainly, even though most of you watching this have thought about it. The fear of losing your memory. Most people aren't afraid of forgetting where they left their keys. They're afraid of forgetting the names, faces, stories, and moments that make them who they are. Not the fear of illness in general, the specific fear of losing who you are. Your stories, the face of someone you love, the ability to be the same person you've always been in the rooms that matter most to you. That fear is real. It's common, and almost nobody talks about it without softening the edges first. Which makes the next finding worth sitting with slowly. Researchers tracked 960 older adults for nearly 5 years, measuring their diet and testing their cognitive function at regular intervals. They were looking for what actual food choices predicted over time, not supplements, not programs, not interventions. The people who ate approximately one daily serving of leafy greens, including romaine, showed cognitive aging equivalent to being 11 years younger than those who ate the least. 11 years, not a vague improvement. A measurable, numeric difference that researchers could observe and track. One salad bowl, grown from a single planting that can keep producing leaves for most of a season, because romaine is cut and come again. You take the outer leaves. The center keeps going. One serving of leafy greens means a consistent daily habit, not an occasional salad. The benefit in the study tracked with regularity over time. But for something this accessible, and this low cost to grow yourself, consistency is genuinely achievable. 11 years is a long time. One serving of leaves is a small ask. We'd love to know. If you do the math on 11 years, what age does that bring you to? Drop it in the comments. We read everyone. Brain protection from a leaf. Bone protection is next, and it starts with a number that might change how seriously you take a fall. Vegetable 4. Green beans. Most people think of bone health as something to address over time, gradually, with calcium supplements, and maybe some extra dairy. The number coming up suggests the timeline deserves more urgency than that. Green beans, and the nutrient inside them that most people's calcium routines are missing. You've probably heard that calcium matters for bones. That's true. What most people haven't been told is that calcium alone isn't enough. Your body needs a companion nutrient just to transport calcium where it belongs. That nutrient is vitamin K. Without adequate vitamin K, a significant portion of the calcium you consume doesn't reach bone tissue the way it should. It's not a calcium problem, it's a delivery problem. Green beans are one of the most accessible garden sources of vitamin K you can grow. Here's the number worth knowing. A fracture from a fall is the single most common turning point from independent living to needing care for adults over 60. Osteoporosis affects roughly 1 in 3 women and 1 in 5 men over 50 worldwide. If you're on warfarin or other blood-thinning medications, vitamin K can interact with your dosage. Check with your doctor before significantly changing your intake of vitamin K-rich vegetables. This is mentioned in the pinned comment below. Independence isn't lost gradually, most of the time. It's lost in a single fall. This is one of the most practical things in the garden to grow against that. Calcium you already knew about. Magnesium is next, and almost nobody knows it's missing. Up to this point we've mostly talked about vegetables that support long-term health. The next few are different. These are the vegetables gardeners keep returning to, because the effects are simply too difficult to ignore. Vegetable 5. Swiss chard. If you've done everything right with your diet and your blood pressure still doesn't cooperate, this might be why. Here's the strange part. Some people spend years blaming salt alone for their blood pressure, while a completely different nutritional gap quietly goes unnoticed in the background. For 20 years, the blood pressure conversation has been about sodium. Cut the salt, read the labels, avoid processed food. All of that remains true, but it's an incomplete picture, and the missing piece affects a significant number of adults over 50. Magnesium deficiency is more common in older adults than most nutritional guidelines acknowledge, and it has a direct, measurable relationship with blood pressure, independent of sodium intake. This means some people are doing everything they've been told and still seeing elevated numbers because the conversation started in the wrong place. Swiss chard provides both magnesium and potassium, the two minerals most directly tied to this gap. Think of it this way. Imagine a farmer in his late 60s, meticulous about his diet for years, low sodium, no processed food, regular walks, blood pressure still elevated. His doctor finally checks magnesium deficiency. 3 months after addressing it, his numbers shift in a direction years of sodium restriction hadn't moved them. That story isn't uncommon. It's just rarely told. Magnesium supplementation without medical guidance can cause problems in people with kidney disease. If you're considering supplementation rather than dietary sources, check first. Growing and eating chard is generally safe for healthy adults. You weren't ignoring the right things. You were just missing one. Swiss chard fills a gap. The next vegetable is the one that practically takes care of itself and has a reputation in gardening circles you'll understand immediately. Vegetable 6. Sunchokes. There's an old joke about this next vegetable among experienced gardeners. The joke is that once you plant it you'll never get rid of it. And that, it turns out, is exactly why we're recommending it. Sunchokes. Also called Jerusalem artichokes, and not actually from Jerusalem, and not actually an artichoke. So right away this one's earning its reputation for being complicated. Plant them once. Harvest for years. They spread without prompting. They return every season. For anyone whose energy or joint mobility has changed, this is arguably the closest thing to a self-maintaining crop in existence. Sunchokes store their carbohydrate as inulin, a fiber that behaves unlike most starches. Instead of being digested and raising blood sugar, inulin passes through to the large intestine, where it selectively feeds beneficial gut bacteria. It's technically a carbohydrate that acts like food for your microbiome. Research on inulin specifically has found it increases populations of bifidobacterium and lactobacillus, the bacterial families associated with reduced inflammation and better digestive regularity. For older adults where gut microbiome diversity tends to narrow, that kind of targeted prebiotic support matters more, not less. The same fiber that nourishes your gut bacteria can cause significant bloating in people who aren't used to it. Start with a small portion and build gradually. If you have existing digestive conditions like IBS or Crohn's, check with your doctor before adding Sunchokes regularly. The vegetable that won't let you give up on it, even if you try. Now, the one that generated the most conversation when we first found this research. If you've been waiting for the garlic section, this is it. And somewhere in this list there's a vegetable that could outlive you. We'll come back to that thought. Vegetable 7. Garlic. We said there was a vegetable on this list that researchers compared to prescription medication. This is it, and the number is worth hearing slowly. Garlic. For millions of adults over 60, the morning begins with a blood pressure pill. Maybe one, maybe a combination. There may have been years of adjusting doses, managing side effects, fatigue, lightheadedness, that low-level daily reminder that something in your body needs chemical help to do what it once did without thinking. This is not a conversation about stopping that medication. Please don't change any prescription without talking to your doctor. But here's what 12 clinical trials found. Garlic contains compounds, primarily allicin, that appear to relax blood vessel walls and support circulation in ways that measurably affect blood pressure over consistent use. Across 12 trials covering 553 people with diagnosed high blood pressure, garlic lowered systolic pressure by an average of 8.3 points. Diastolic, the bottom number, by 5.5 points. The researchers described those reductions as comparable in magnitude to some standard blood pressure medications. Garlic's effect appears strongest with consistent daily use over weeks, not one meal. And the research used specific concentrations, often aged garlic extract in the trials. Eating garlic regularly is a different variable than a clinical dose. But comparable to medication in a peer-reviewed context is not language researchers use casually. A plant you grew in your own soil. A reduction researchers describe in clinical language. That is not a small thing. Garlic is the hardest worker on this list. What's coming next is the most surprising. A vegetable nobody associates with brain health that showed up in a study covering 44,000 people. Vegetable 8. Zucchini. What if the vegetable you were giving away to your neighbors because you had too much of it was also one of the most researched on this list for dementia risk? Zucchini. Nobody talks about zucchini and brain health. It doesn't appear on the lists. It doesn't have a reputation. It doesn't get the press that blueberries and salmon and dark chocolate get. But it showed up in a review covering 44,000 people across 9 studies as one of the vegetables most consistently associated with lower risk of cognitive decline and dementia. Zucchini is also rich in lutein and zeaxanthin, 2 carotenoids that accumulate in the retina and appear to protect against age-related macular degeneration. The same pathways that degrade cognitive function with age are connected to the visual system in ways researchers are still mapping. But the practical picture is simpler. Zucchini appears to be doing protective work in 2 of the places most affected by aging. 9 studies. 44,000 people. This isn't a pilot program or a single lab finding. And it's coming from the vegetable you were offloading to your neighbors, because one plant produces more than a household can eat. Association is not causation. These are observational studies. They show a relationship between zucchini intake and outcomes, not proof that zucchini causes protection. That's true of most nutrition research. It's worth naming here honestly rather than overselling it. The vegetable you were giving away was working harder than you knew. From the biggest harvest to the smallest plants, and one that might be sitting on your windowsill right now, doing something you've never been told about. Vegetable 9. Chives. Of all the things on this list, the next one might be the most surprising to find here. Not because the research is weak, but because you may already have it. Chives. Chives have a reputation as a garnish. Something you snip over a baked potato, or scatter across a bowl of soup. They don't feel like medicine. They don't even feel like a vegetable, really. And yet, chives contain quercetin, a plant compound that has been studied for 3 specific age-related concerns: the preservation of muscle mass, the support of bone density, and potential activity in the central nervous system. Muscle loss, sarcopenia, is one of the quietest drivers of frailty, falls, and diminished independence in older adults. It gets less public attention than heart disease or memory, and it starts earlier than most people realize. Studies on quercetin have found measurable effects on muscle fiber preservation in aging tissue. Separate research has examined its ability to cross the blood-brain barrier, something that limits most compounds from having neurological effects. The mechanisms are still being studied, but the compound is already in your windowsill pot. Quercetin research is promising but not conclusive. The human trial evidence is still building. Chives won't reverse sarcopenia, but as part of a diet that takes muscle health seriously, they're an accessible and zero-effort addition. You may have been underestimating what's growing on your windowsill for years. Most of what we've covered today gives you something to grow toward. The garlic for the long season, the romaine for the daily habit. The chives for the decade of returns. But there's one more plant, and it's the only one on this list that's designed to give you something you can hold in your hands before the month is out. This last one won't produce the biggest health statistic we've discussed today, but it may be responsible for more successful gardens than anything else on this list. And in the long run that can matter even more. Vegetable 10. Radishes. Everything else on this list asks something of you over time. The garlic needs an autumn. The chives need a season. The sunchokes need a year. This one asks for a month, and the reason we saved it for last has nothing to do with its health story. Radishes. The biggest barrier to starting a garden or starting this list isn't soil access. It isn't cost. It isn't physical ability. Isn't usually the soil. It isn't the weather. It isn't even the cost. It's a quiet internal question. Can I actually do this? That's the question sitting quietly underneath thousands of unopened seed packets every year. Radishes answer that question with evidence instead of reassurance. Many varieties go from seed to harvest in 25 to 30 days, faster than a library book comes due. You will hold something in your hands that you grew yourself from the ground that didn't exist a month ago. They grow in a window box, a deep tray, a repurposed pot. They don't need depth or space or staking. They need almost nothing. The seed is large enough to handle easily, the soil requirements are minimal, and the visual of the harvest, that red or white globe emerging from the earth, is genuinely satisfying in a way that nothing else on this list can match in the same time frame. One radish harvest won't transform your health. That's not the point. The point is what it does to your willingness to plant the next thing. And the thing after that. The most important thing a radish does is not nutritional. It's evidential. It proves to you, specifically, that you can do this. If you plant chives this week, and tend them, and pass them on to someone learning to cook from watching you, that's a kind of growing that has nothing to do with soil. We started with a study nobody expected, that the act of growing itself, before a single vegetable is eaten, was already working. Everything since then has been what happens when you add 10 good reasons on top of that. Here's what you now know. Beetroot responds more powerfully in your body now than it would have 30 years ago. Tomatoes get stronger when you cook them, and you've probably been doing that for years. Romaine is the difference, in one study, between a mind that measures 60 and a mind that measures 71. Green beans protect the bones that keep you standing independently. Swiss chard fills the magnesium gap almost no one told you was there. Sunchokes do maintenance work in your gut that asks almost nothing of you after the first planting. Garlic produces reductions that researchers compared, in clinical language, to prescription blood pressure medication. Zucchini showed up in a 44,000-person study, quiet and unannounced, protecting memory and eyesight simultaneously. Chives have been growing on your windowsill for years, doing more than you knew. And radishes are waiting for this weekend. Evidence, in less than a month, that you're the kind of person who grows things. The chives you start today might still be growing long after you've passed them on to someone who learned to cook from watching you. That's not a small thing. That's a kind of legacy most people don't think to name, but gardeners understand it without having to. So here's the question we'd genuinely like you to answer. Which one surprised you most? And which one are you growing first? Leave it in the comments. We'll be in there. If this is the kind of content that's useful to you, specific, research-backed, built for the way your body actually works at this stage of life, subscribe. We have more coming, and it's worth not missing. Start with the radishes this weekend. A month from now you'll have a harvest. A year from now you'll have a garden. And somewhere down the road you may realize you were growing far more than vegetables the entire time.